Okay, starting the last share on Hilchos Ceiru Chatsiros. Discussed two Simanim, Siman Shin Tzadik Beis and Siman Shin Tzadik Hey. Shin Tzadik Beis discusses a Ir Shel Yachid and a Ir Shel Rabim. Ir Shel Yachid means a city which was built by a single person. He built it for his own purpose, for the purpose of renting it out to other people. That city is considered a single chatzar. It's a chatzar achas. That means the definition of a Ir Shel Yachid is a chatzar, one chatzar. It's not a mavai that has different chatzeres. It's one big chatzar, the whole city. That's how the Taz understands it. Now, it cannot be compared to Reshus Rabim if the mevoyos were done properly with a lechi or a kaira. That means the mevoyos of this Ir Shel Yachid were properly closed off. Each mevoy was defined with its lechi and its kaira into one big collection of mevoyos, and now it's a Ir Shel Yachid. Now, by the way, that's the Alter Rebbe adds, and the Mishnah Berurah are the ones that add these words that it's lechi or kaira. Then the whole city could be united with one sheet of mevoyos, and you could carry in the whole city, and it does not need a shiur. It doesn't need its own. It doesn't need to leave, because we learned that there's a concept that you have to be mashayir. You have to leave a specific area, so people shouldn't forget the idea of Eir, which we're going to see soon also, and each mavoy essentially cannot do its own Eirav. That's how the Levush understands it. It's Einei, the Lashon of Levush is Efshar, I think. And therefore, these guys, and they make one Eirav. What is a Ir Shel Yachid? So yes, the Alter Rebbe and the Shulchan Aruch, they take the position Ir Shel Yachid means it was built by a single person. If you look in the Tzemach Tzedek and Chidushim, Perek Hey Mishnah Vav, it's on page 88 in your white books, it brings the Ritva. The Ritva brings three opinions. What's considered the Ir Shel Yachid? The first opinion is the Shittas Rashi, that the Ir Shel Yachid means that it's not a Reshus Rabim, means it does not have 600,000 people, and therefore any street in this town is not a Reshus Rabim, even if it's wide 16 amas. Shittas Rashi is Reshus Rabim is 600,000 people, and the clear understanding, the way the Ritva understands Rashi, the way the Tzemach Tzedek understands the Ritva understands Rashi is Reshus Rabim means a city which has 600,000 people, not that a specific street has 600,000 people, which we already went through in the past. That's the Shitta of Rashi. First shita, second shita is a shita Rabbeinu Tam, that you do not need shishim riboy, and it still can have a Reshus Rabim if it's 16 amas wide. The Ritva himself, when he discusses the Reshus Rabim, it's all quotes from Tzemach Tzedek. He brings that the majority of the Goinim already paskin like the Rabbeinu Tam, that it's only the din of 16 amas, and therefore a Ir Shel Yachid would mean a city which does not have any street which is 16 amas wide. And then the Ritva himself has a position somewhere in the middle. Ir Shel Yachid means that it could be, that's not about the width and the concept, whether it has a Reshus Rabim or does not have a Reshus Rabim. It's rather what is the intention of the person who built it, whether that it could be a concept of a city which has Reshus Rabim of 600, it has 600,000 people in the city, and it has streets which are 16 amas wide, and everything else. If it was built meikare, like a city of a Yachid, then it's considered the Ir Shel Yachid. And it's mashma from the Ritva that as long as the owner of the city has the right to change the streets, close the streets, etc., it is not considered Mosur l'Rabim b'chol eis, that everybody, the Rabim, have a right to do it, to access the streets. The owner has technically a right to do it, and therefore it is considered a Ir Shel Yachid. Tzemach Tzedek also explains that even according to Tosfos, if it has all the time of Reshus Harabim, which means it became a Reshus Harabim, Ir Shel Rabim, then according to Tosfos, we say we don't care who built it and what was the purpose of it. We look at whether it has a, Rashi and Tosfos only disagree on whether there is a Reshus Harabim, whether what Reshus Harabim is. But the idea of Ir Shel Yachid versus the Ir Shel Rabim is whether it has a Reshus Harabim or doesn't have a Reshus Harabim. So the way that according to the Ritva, the way the Ritva understands Tosfos, then it would mean that even if a private person built a city, and there are streets over there which are Reshus Harabims, then the whole city is considered the Ir Shel Rabim. Now, B'Poyel, there is no real nafkamina between the Ir Shel Yachid and the Ir Shel Rabim regarding carrying. The nafkamina is only regarding if you could do one Eruv or two Eiruvim, or whether how you could split the Mavayos, which is what's going to be discussed in the Siman. But for carrying, there is no difference. If it's not properly closed off, you can't carry. If it doesn't have an Eruv, you can't carry. The only question is how to do the closing and how to do the Eid, how to do the actual Eruv. So there's no real nafkamina lahalacha between the shittas as it refers to carrying. The only nafkamina would be how to define each one of them. It's pretty clear the Shulchan Aruch holds like the Ritva. The Alter Rebbe also takes the approach of the Ritva, that the Alter Rebbe only discusses in the Shulchan Aruch, so the Ir Shel Yachid is defined whether a city was built by a specific person, and really a Ir Shel Yachid would not need a Eruv by any way. It would not need an Eruv. The only reason is, like it seems the Lashon Alter Rebbe, it's doimet to Reshus Harabim. You want to eliminate the fact that it's similar to Reshus Harabim, so you have to be mesaken the mevoyos and everything else, and then you could do a singular Eruv. But otherwise, one Eruv would be enough for a Ir Shel Yachid. Now, a Ir Shel Yachid, which the person built himself, and then he sold everything to everybody, to people, that then became a Ir Shel Rabim. It's no longer Ir Shel Yachid. He built it and now he went and sold it. However, if he retains the rights and the jurisdiction to do whatever he wants on the streets of the city, then it is still considered a Ir Shel Yachid, even if he sold every single unit in the city to people, to independent people. That means every single house in the city belongs to other people. It was sold to them, not rented to them, it was sold to them. But the owner, the original builder, still retained the rights to the public areas of the city. It still remains a Ir Shel Yachid. Now, what happens if the city only has one opening to it? The city only has one entrance to it. It's surrounded by a wall, only has one entrance. And then now, if it was always a Ir Shel Rabim, then, and it only has one entrance, it's not doimet to Reshus Harabim. And you could do one shituf mevoyos for the whole city. But that's when it comes to Ir Shel Rabim. If it's Ir Shel Yachid, there's really no nafkamina if it has one door or two doors or more, when it comes to one shituf or not. The fact is, since it's an Ir Shel Yachid, you could still do, it's considered one reshus, and you could do one shituf. The only difference, if it has one entrance or more than one entrance, is whether it is similar to a Reshus Harabim or it's not similar to a Reshus Harabim. Now, what happens if a city was a Ir Shel Rabim from the beginning? It was not a Ir Shel Yachid, which we discussed in the beginning of the סימן, but it was a Ir Shel Rabim. Now, just an interesting thing that the Shitta, by the Shitta of the Chazon Ish, is that you could convert a Ir Shel Yachid to Ir Shel Rabim if there was a Ir Shel Yachid and then the Rabim came and built their own houses attached to this Ir Shel Yachid. By now, it's already became an Ir Shel Rabim by the mere fact that it's no longer one Ir Shel Yachid. Ir Shel Yachid means the whole city, or within all its borders, it all belongs to one person. But if you have a city that belongs to one person, then there was a new development built, which is part of the same city, attached to the city, and it became part of the same city, but it was built by other people, by private people, it's no longer Shel Yachid, because that part is part of the city, but it's really Shel Rabim. So it now became a Ir Shel Rabim. So if you have an Ir Shel Rabim, which has two entrances to it, so therefore it's similar to the Reshus Harabim, because you enter from one side, you exit from the other side. It's already doime to to a Reshus Rabim, then you cannot make one singular Eruv for the whole city. You have to leave a Shiur. You have to leave a specific area which is not part of the same Eruv. That could be one house, that could be one street, that could be one chatzir, whatever it is, and then everybody else makes a shituf between themselves. And these people, this own house, or this own chatzir, or this own mava, which is separate from it, could make its own eruv. The people cannot carry from one, if the kelim, the roshav subebayis, cannot be carried, even if there is between them, they united themselves, but it's two separate eruvim, you can't carry from one to the other. And neither could the ones outside bring into the ones inside. And the reason is because of a heker. The idea of a shiur is that you want to have a heker that people, whether it's the kids, whether it's the adults, everybody should know that the concept is not such a thing as you're allowed to carry on Shabbos. You're allowed to carry on Shabbos because there's Eruv. But if there is no Eruv, you're not allowed to carry. If the whole city is a Ir Shel Rabim, and the whole city became its own, one Eruv, then anybody who's going to grow up in the city will never know that there's such a concept. You're not allowed to carry on Shabbos. They're going to go somewhere else and they're going to carry on Shabbos. So therefore, the idea of an Eruv in a public city could only be done if there is a constant reminder that is there in the city that the only reason you're allowed to carry is because there is a Eruv. Right? And now, what does it mean that that people are going to think it's a Reshus Rabim? It's people are going to make a mistake. It's because you're talking about a city which has 600,000 people. The Alter Rebbe here says city, doesn't say street, and therefore the city it's doimet to Reshus Rabim, even though it has the openings. And therefore they have to know that about the Eruv, and without an Eruv you're not allowed to carry. And as long as you have a shiur, there will not be the idea of an Eruv will not be forgotten from the Jewish nation. However, so now if you say that a Reshus Rabim is only in a city which has 600,000 people, then if you have a city which has less than 600,000 people, you don't have to make a shiur. You can make one eruv for the whole city because the city is not doimet to Reshus Rabim b'chlal. But if you have a shiur of 16 ames, therefore, the Alter Rebbe says in today's day and age, in the Alter Rebbe's days, they didn't make a shiur in any city. Why? Because they already accepted there's going to be 600,000 people. It's the 600,000 people in a city that's considered a Reshus Rabim. Without, that's not a Reshus Rabim. In the time of the Alter Rebbe, there was no city in the world with Jews that had 600,000 people where Jews lived. Therefore, there was no need to make a shiur in any city today. That no longer applies because today a lot of cities where Jews live have more than 600,000 people. So that's the whole idea of Ein Reshus Rabim B'zman Hazeh is a practical discussion. Could there be Reshus Rabim B'zman Hazeh or not? There was no cities with that amount of people. There's today shuls which are named after villages, where the shul on a regular shachris has more people than residents of that village that it's named after had throughout the history of the village. But that's today you're talking about much bigger amounts. Now that's in short what Seif Aleph is. Now you want to make a shiur. You don't have to make a shiur. The houses that the Alter Rebbe says in Sif Gimel, the houses that are part of the shiur do not have to be open to the city. They could just be part of the city, even if their back is to the rest of the city, and there's no way to access from the main part of the city into these houses. Still, being that they're part of the city area, they could be excluded they could be used as a shiur for the exclusion of them for the purpose of an eruv. Even though if you would want to make an eruv, you would not be able to, because there is no access that's shared between these houses and the rest of the city. However, if you have goyish houses and you want to be meshayir just goyish houses. There's yesh oimrim that it does work, yesh oimrim that it doesn't work. The Magen Avraham leaves it hanging. By the way, if you look in Al Yirabban, Sifkot and Beis, he says that this is the reason why we don't make a shiur today in cities. Is not, he doesn't say it's not because of the 600,000, but he says the reason, Al Yirabban says the reason is because today we consider the houses of the goyim as a shiur, and every city that you didn't live in has goyish houses, and therefore that is already by definition a shiur because they are not part of the Eruv, you're not carrying into the goy's houses or the goy's chatzeret, and therefore there's always going to be a shiur in every city, therefore you don't have to make a shiur. Now, what happens is when you have all the people from a certain mavoi joined and made one shituf, all the people from the city made a shituf mavoyis together, and one mavoi decided they are not interested in being part of this communal city Eruv. Not only that, they didn't even make a shituf Eruv between themselves. So they are not allowed to carry within their own mavoi, and for sure not allowed to carry in the rest of the city. Now this mavoi became the shiur for the rest of the city. But these bnei mavoi are also make the rest of the city asur. This is the concept of regel ha'asura b'mkayma, is oiser also shaloi b'mkayma. Why? How could it be a concept that regel shaloi b'mkayma is oiser, a regel ha'asura b'mkayma is oiser shaloi b'mkayma? Is because being that the regel ha'asura b'mkayma should not let carry within their own mavoi, asura b'mkayma has a drisas regel because they're part of the city on the makkah, the rest of the place. So therefore, she's the regel. This regel is oiser also shaloi b'mkayma. So therefore, this mavoi which did not make an eruv within themselves to be able to carry over there, they create a problem for the rest of the city. The only way they could solve it is by creating an itztaba, a 4 tfachim high platform in front of that mavoi, which blocks off that mavoi, and that shows that they do not want to be part of the city. They want to be mistalik from the city. They're mistalik themselves from the city. Then it helps. Now, even though the people from this mavoi will continue walking into the other mavois, they'll go over the tztaba, or people from the rest of the city will go over the tztaba and walk into this mavoi. Even if they don't even have any other exit to go out, they only could go through this tztaba and go into the main area, it's still not considered asur. Once there was a siluk done, and the siluk by doing this was a siluk from usage. Once there's a siluk from usage done, then no longer does drisas haregel have the effect of making it asur and everybody else, and therefore it's no longer, even though it's regel asura b'mkayma, the drisas haregel no longer creates the problem of that oiseres she'ena b'mkayma. Now, if every single mavoi made its own eruv, but they did not make an eruv between them as a general city-wide eruv, but every mavoi did its own. They closed themselves properly and they did whatever they had to do, and they made their own eruv for each and every mavoi by itself. Then they are not oiser one another. Not only that, why? Because each mavoi by itself is regel muteres b'mkayma. Therefore, it's regel muteres b'mkayma. It's obviously not oiser on shaloi b'mkayma. Not only that, when each mavoi does independently its own eruv, then you have automatically a shiur, because every single person, every single mavoi knows that you're not allowed to carry outside your mavoi, because you're only allowed to carry inside your mavoi, because that's what the eruv is. That's the biggest shiur that could be possible in such a scenario. All this is regarding a city of Rabim, obviously, because only a city of Rabim needs a shiur. A city of Yachid does not need a shiur. Right, so in the Ir Shel Rabim, which needs a shiur, when one mavoi separated itself, they have to make a idea of a siluk, which is to put their to put the staba in front of their houses. But the ir shel yachid, which does not need a siluk at all, and therefore an ir shel yachid, like we said before, is considered one bechot, so that every single member of the city has a right to walk on every single street regarding the city. So now, even if then afterwards the ir shel yachid became a ir shel rabim, we still say it does not need a shiur. That is the halacha. So now, being that originally they're all considered one chatzir, if one mavoi wants to separate itself from the rest of the mavayos, they create a problem for the rest of the city, and they have to. And now it's considered one mavoi rather than it's one chatzir, one mavoi, and they need a itztaba on each and every single mavoi that wants to separate itself from it. There's no longer you could have one eruv for all of them, and each one is oyser on the other one. The same idea as we learned when you have one chatzir within a mavoi that does not want to participate in the shit of mevayos, it creates a problem for the rest of the chatzeres, and each chatzer has to have its own heker. Now, that's in the ir shel yachid versus the ir shel rabim. In the ir shel rabim, it's much easier to separate. We know that the ir shel rabim, you could take one mavoi, you have to make a shiur, but if you take one mavoi out of the equation of the rest of the city and you make it independent, and each mavoi could become independent, each mavoi could do its own eruv, it's not a problem. So now, what happens if this ir shel rabim has a chayma around it, total chayma around it, and they made glosses, because we know to be mater shel rabim, you have to put glosses, that's how the Alter Rebbe paskins. Now, you want to go and you want to split the city in two. You cannot split it along the length of the Rishus Harabim, that on one side of the Rishus Harabim is going to be one eruv, and on the other side of the Rishus Harabim is going to be a different eruv. You don't want to, it's already closed off with glosses and everything, but you want to have that the right side of the Rishus Harabim the right side of the highway is one eruv, the left side is another eruv. It's a problem because everybody is going to be using the same main Rishus Harabim, and each one is going to be oyser on the other one. They're both connected. Really, they should be doing one eruv, closing off the Rishus Harabim, doing one eruv. But if they dafka want to do two separate Eirovim, then the only way, and that is a problem, even if, let's say the north side decides that they're not good, they're mesalging themselves completely from the Rishus Harabim, it's still a problem, because even if they decide they're not going to be mishtamish in the Rishus Harabim siluk from mishtamshus, they still have no other way to access, go from one mavoi to another mavoi within their own, let's say the north side. There's drisas haregel, and therefore they will make each other asur. Why is that? Because they both have equal rights to the Rishus Harabim. When we were discussing a chatzir apnimis and a chatzir chitzayin, which we learned a few simanim ago, and over there, the chatzir apnimis, their main use is bnei apnimis. Chatzir chitzayin, their main use is bnei chitzayin. Over here, the Rishus Harabim, one side separating itself from the other one and saying we're not using it for any tashmishim, we're only using it for walking. Drisas haregel is not enough, because they both have equal rights to the same one. Therefore, the only way to do it is by splitting it, not splitting the Rishus Harabim nor one side and the other side, but rather cutting the city in a way that it crosses over the Rishus Harabim. The same thing applies when you have one mavoi with two chatzeres on both sides of it, and each side wants to make their own Eruv. It also doesn't work, because they both have shared usage on the main mavoi in the middle. So even if one side will decide they're masalik any usage of the mavoi and they only want to use it for walking, it will still be considered a problem, because they both have equal rights to this mavoi. So the only way that will work is the same itztaba that we discussed previously will also work in this instance, that if the mavayis if the chatzeres on one side of the mavoi want to build an itztaba to separate themselves, then it works just like it works by the previous one, because the siluk, which is done just by talking, is not enough, but a siluk tashmish, which is done with an action of building an itztaba, is already enough. But so what is the solution? If they do want to have two separate Iruvim, then instead of splitting it along the length of the Reshus Harabim, each side, one side of the Reshus Harabim is one, and the other side of the Reshus Harabim is the other one, you cut the city in such a way that each side gets a full section of the Reshus Harabim. You cut it in a way, let's say that instead of it being, let's say the Reshus Harabim goes east-west, and instead of you cutting it north and south, the part which is north of the Reshus Harabim and the part south of the Reshus Harabim is two separate ones, which you're not allowed to do, you cut the city in a way that the cut goes from north to south, and that way the east side has a full Reshus Harabim up until the middle of the city, and the west side has a full Reshus Harabim also up until the middle of the city. But still, they still have to make a separation right in the middle, because if you leave it open as it is, even if it's a city which is completely closed, if you leave it open, now each side becomes part of the Milui L'Malkam Aserloi. So therefore, in the middle of the Reshus Harabim, you have to make a Tzuras HaPesach, the same way in the middle of a Mav, you have to make a Tzuras HaPesach, something which delineates the separation between the two parts, and that way, once you make it Tzuras HaPesach, that already shows that it's considered two separate areas, and it's fine. And so that's, you need a Tzuras HaPesach, and obviously the idea we need a Tzuras HaPesach is if we're talking about Reshus Harabim, obviously the Reshus Harabim is wide enough. But if this part of the Reshus Harabim is not wide enough, it's less than 10 ames, and in the place where you want to split it. And this, by the way, you're going to start doing Shin Mem Hey again. You're going to see that this, what you learn in Shin Tzadik Beis, matches up with only one of the shittas that I mentioned in Shin Mem Hey about Reshus Harabim Shemis Katzeres in the middle of it. So over there, if it's less than 10 ames wide, you could do one pass, or just the Atfachim, or two passim from the two sides, and that is already Mechalik the Reshuyas, and it's all good, but you can't use a Lechi or a Kaira, only you could use Tzuras HaPesach, or a passim if it's less than 10 ames. Lechi and Kaira do not work to separate Reshuyas. Lechi and Kaira only works to close off a singular Reshus. So Lechi and Kaira do not work to create a separation between, make one Reshus versus the other Reshus. So Lechi and Kaira could work for one, and Tzuras HaPesach does work, and Pasin also work. The Pasin don't work for more than 10 ames wide, but the Tzuras HaPesach will work whether it's less than 10 ames or it's more than 10 ames. And a itztaba will not work over here. Itztaba that we mentioned that works in the entrance of a mavoi does not work in the middle of a Reshus Harabim, because the Rabim go right over this itztaba, and therefore it will not work. Now, once you do separate these two with the Tzuras HaPesach or the Pasim, whichever way you want to do it, once that is done, which is Mechalik the Reshuyas, the fact that one side went over to the other side, is walking from one side to another, has absolutely no bearing on canceling it, even though it's Rabim Boikim from one side to the other side of the Reshus Harabim through the Tzuras HaPesach, still considered like a complete separation of the two Reshuyas. We look at it as two Chatsiris which are open to each other with a Tzuras HaPesach between them, and then each side is Regel HaMuteres B'Mkayma, and therefore Regel HaMuteres B'Mkayma is not Oyser with Drissas HaRegel on a place which is where it goes into. The only problem is when it's Regel HaSura B'Mkayma, then it's Oyser on the other one, or if there is usage. But if there is only Drissas HaRegel without Tashmishim, and the side where there's going to be Drissas HaRegel is the side which from where you're doing Drissas HaRegel in itself is closed off in a way that you are allowed to carry, and Drissas HaRegel and Muteres B'Mkayma is no longer Oyser on the other side, it's not longer oyser on the place where there is a drisas haregel, because now, going back to the original idea which you mentioned before, the usage of each one on the other side's property is not equal, up until the reason why you can't split Rishus Harabim along it at one side of the Rishus Harabim, that both of them use the Rishus Harabim because both of them have equal rights. When you cut the Rishus Harabim with the Tzuras HaPesach, so the top half of the Rishus Harabim has Chatsiris on both sides, that whole area is mainly used by the people living on that side. And the other one is mainly used by people living on the other side. So therefore the fact that this regel, there's no equal of him, so this regel will not make it asur. Mashenkin, when there is, if you split the Rishus Harabim the other way, then you have a problem because both of them have equal usage rights to the same place. The same thing would apply also to a mavoi, like we already learned to the mavoi, and this Rishus Harabim has the same dinim. If you want to split the mavoi one side will also be a problem. The only way is if you split the mavoi, you choose that right in the middle of the mavoi, you will make a Tzuras HaPesach which will split it. Now, if you look in the footnote on Seif Hey, there is over there in the what I mentioned now is all discussed in the parentheses in Seif Hey, but in the footnote over there, the Alter Rebbe over there discusses, he explains why the logic, why you must say that a Tzuras HaPesach or Pasim will help to separate a Rishus even when there is Drisas Haregel. That's what we just discussed now, that a Tzuras HaPesach or a Pasim will help to split this Rishus Harabim in the middle, even if there is Drisas Haregel from one side to another. Why? Because the Tash Mishim from one side is not Shaveh for both of them. The usage rights of each one of them on the other one is not the same. It's mainly used by one. Each half is mainly used by their own people. So first the Alter Rebbe mentions that this din is brought in the Magen Avraham and Siman Shin Pei Vav Sifkot and Gimel. Tzuras HaPesach helps to be Masalik, if you want to be Masalik, separate the Yidden to not be part of the Eirov, and Siman Shin Samach Daled, that if when you have a Mavoi Mefulosh, Tzuras HaPesach helps. And from that, the Alter Rebbe understands that Tzuras HaPesach helps even when there is Drisas Rabim, Drisas Haregel from one to another, because if it's not Tashmishim or not Shaveh, then you don't have such a problem. And the Alter Rebbe says, if you're going to come and tell me that Tzuras HaPesach does not help you anything, when you have a Drisas Rabim, then you have a problem. If you have a Ir Mukefes Chayma, and the city has Goyim in it, and there are Yidden also in the city, then L'chayra Tzuras HaPesach is not going to help. Why? Because the Goyim of Drisas Haregel onto the streets of the Yidden, and the Yidden of Drisas Haregel on the streets of the Goyim, and you're going to have to say that the Yidden have to make an Eirov, and they have to be Soicher from each Goy when it comes to that. And because we don't say that that's what has to be done in such a city, you always say that you have to make it Tzuras HaPesach, Muzman Zogan, you have to separate Muzman Zogan, and the only way to do it is through a Tzuras HaPesach, even when there is Drisas Rabim over there. Yeah, because in Siman Shin Samach Gimel, when you look at it, it says that between a Yid and a Goy, you have a voice, between a Yid and a Goy, it's not going to Tzuras HaPesach. So obviously, the fact that you do it over there also shows that separation, even though there's Drisas Haregel, being that there's no Tashmishim, it's not Shaveh, Tzuras HaPesach will help to separate in such a scenario. If it helps by a Goy, it for sure helps for a Yid, and that's the Alter Rebbe clearly passing that in Shin Samach Gimel Seif Lamed Beis, that the Minhag HaPashut is that every Mavoi is Mesuken with a Tzuras HaPesach. Now, what happens if you want to take a mavoi and you want to make a shiur, but instead of making a shiur for a whole mavoi, like we discussed earlier, you're making only a half a mavoi into a shiur? You want to separate the mavoi in half? Same din applies, the same as every separating of a mavoi. You're going to have to put a Tzuras HaPesach in the middle of the mavoi, and then the shiur will be beyond the Tzuras HaPesach. and the rest of it will be united with the rest of the city and be part of that one Eruv. Over there you need Tzuras HaPesach if it's wider than 10 ames, or Pasim if it's less than 10 ames. And then the Alter Rebbe adds, even in Ir Shel Yachid, if you want to separate over there, Tzuras HaPesach and Pasim also works, but the Lechi and Kaira, which we already discussed up until now, that does work for Hechsher Mevoyos, to close off a Mavoy, does not work, he goes back to what we said before, does not work to separate a Reshus between one and the other, for the purpose that each one wants to make their own Eruv. Rather, they're going to have to make a Lechi and a Kaira does not separate the Reshus. A Lechi and a Kaira closes off a Reshus from a Reshus Rabim, but a Lechi and a Kaira does not separate an existing Mavor, an existing Chatzir into two. So this is all first 5 Seifim of the Alter Rebbe. Now comes, and the Alter Rebbe comes and says, all this is talking about when the city was properly designed and properly done, and all the mevayos were already fixed with Tzuras HaPesach, the chitzis, lechi and kaira, whatever needs to be done, or it's a ir mukefes chaim which does not need any help. And over there, you cannot go and say that you're going to split the Reshus Rabim along its length, and everybody's going to, and one side of the Reshus Rabim is going to be one Eruv, and the other side of the Reshus Rabim is going to be another Eruv. But if the Mevayos were not fixed yet, and they were not properly done, or it's a city which is not Mukaf Chayma, and you want to close off a specific Mavoi, then obviously a Lechi and a Kaira works. Because the Lechi and the Kaira does work to close off a Mavoi from a Reshus Rabim. The only problem is to split the Reshus. So when it's one big thing and you want to split it, you need Tzuras HaPesach. But over here, when you have a Reshus Rabim and you're not doing one singular Eruv, not all the Mevayos are connected, not all the Mevayos are Mesukin. So you can't anyways make a full one big Eruv. Therefore, each Mavoi is considered an independent entity. So therefore, you could do a Lechi and a Kaira, and you could leave the ones that are fixed, you could do them with Lechi and Kaira. The ones that are properly done, the ones that are not properly done, you could keep them out of it. Same thing would apply when you have a Mavoi which is open to Reshus Rabim and they did not close off the opening to Reshus Rabim with a Lechi. So then, halfway into the Mavoi, if the people in the back of the Mavoi want to make a Lechi or a Kaira, it also works. You just can't use a Lechi and a Kaira to separate the Mavoi, but you could use a Lechi and a Kaira to close off a Mavoi. So when you have the top half of the Mavoi is open to Reshus Rabim, then you cannot go in there and you cannot split it over there. You cannot use a Lechi and Kaira in the middle of the Mavoi. But if the top part of the outer part of the Mavoi is open to Reshus Rabim and is not Mesukin with Lechi and Kaira, then obviously going halfway into the Mavoi and the people beyond it want to use it, and you could use a Lechi and a Kaira, and the fact that they're walking through it does not make them Asur, because the people who are in the front anyways can't carry in their own area. And this whole din of regel asura b'mkayma she'seres shaloi b'mkayma that we went through until now only applies when each side is already mesukin with a lechi and a mavoi, and they could do an eruv between themselves together, and one part decides not to do it, then you have a problem. But if they decide not to do it, if they're not able to make an eruv together for whatever reason, then you don't anymore have the din of regel. What's the problem? Of regel asura b'mkayma is oiser in another place. If you have a ir hamukefes chayma which has proper doors on it, one of the doors does not have a shar. It doesn't even have a tzuras HaPesach. It only has 2 beams on the 2 sides. Those are considered, each one of them is considered a lechi, and if it's less than 10 amas wide, it works to close it off, even if it's considered a mavoi mefulish rishus harabim. And if there is no rishus harabim in town, even if the whole city is open to a srati, to the highway, which is a rishus harabim, you could put a delis from one side and a lechi from the other one, and then this whole area becomes one big chatzir, and you don't have to be masakin any of the mevoyos inside. All these halachas that apply, that you cannot separate, a lechi doesn't help to separate the mavoy, a lechi doesn't help to separate a rishus harabim, all these only applies when the people have no other way to go out, in and out of their own mavoi, their own chatzir, their own area, without going through this public area. Being that they're forced to go through this area, then you cannot use a lechi to split it. But if you have 2 mavoyos which are open to each other, then each mavoi has its own exit to a rishus harabim, and they want to split themselves up in 2, then yes, that each side could do his own Eruv after splitting it only with a lechi and a kaira, and you don't even need a tzuras HaPesach. And that works because even though they do cross one into another, the fact is they do have a different exit to the rishus harabim. So therefore, a lechi and a kaira does help because their own exit to rishus harabim is dealt with separately. And you want to split them up, you want to separate the 2 mevoyos, then you could use a lechi and a kaira. So now, if you have these 2 mevoyos, so one mavoi is open to another mavoi, and it's also open to rishus harabim, and one mavoi did make an Eruv between themselves, and the other mavoi did not make an Eruv between themselves. Now the people from the mavoi which did not make an Eruv, they have their own exit to rishus harabim. Then over here, koifin al midas zdaim goes the other way. You force them that they have no right to enter the mavoi where the people who did do an Eruv is. So therefore, they should not make them aser.
Only if they walk it, are they aser?
By going into them, you mean you koifin. They shouldn't enter it b'chol.
If the book open, if each one has to open to the rishus and they put a left and they still walk with Salasik.
If they didn't make an Eruv between themselves?
No, each one made an Eruv. So they only put a left and they're open to each one has their own Pesach.
Is it?
They're asked to walk.
They're not asked to walk, no. Because they're motor in their own place. Only when they are in their own.
Splitting them with the mavoi.
If you're splitting the mavoi, since they were mistalik one from another, you could force them not to go. Now, if you have, again, this all applies when the mevoyos need a tikkun, but if you have an Iruv which is mukaf chayma, and therefore you do not need tikkun mevoyos, and it's all considered one big chatzir, then a lechi and a kaira does not help to split even such form of mevoyos. Being that it's all considered one big chatzir, one big mava, you need to actually put tzuras HaPesach wherever you want to split it, even if they're not going to cross upon one another. Each one's open to rishus harabim. You still need tzuras HaPesach. Why? Because every single one, once you're going to split each mava to the other one, since each one is completely open to the one next to it, it's part of the milui to makim ha'asrloi, and therefore, if you want to fix a pirza in a chatzir, you need a tzuras HaPesach or pasim, and a lechi and a kaira does not help. But if they're not considered one chatzir and each one is considered independent, then again a lechi and a kaira does help. The end of Siman Shin Tzadik Beis discusses someone who is mezakeh and shituf mevoyos to the rest of the city. And the Alter Rebbe right away adds this with one Eruv. You don't have to tell them because it is a schus for them. The Aruch HaShulchan adds an interesting and important point that if, in Sif Kotten Tesvav, that if it's not one Eruv for the whole city, but there are different Eiruvim across the city, and you want to be Mezakeh, you have to actually find out to which Eruv they want to be part of. Because you're Mezakeh only to the people on this side, maybe not. You can't be Mezakeh to the people on the other side, because then it could create a problem. This is the Mishnah Berurah brings it. It's a quote from the Maggid Mishnah, and instead of this whole lengthy explanation that the Mishnah Berurah wrote and the Aruch HaShulchan wrote, Alter Rebbe solved it by adding these two words. That is with Eruv Echad. Eruv Echad L'Kulam. Once you do Eruv Echad, only when there's Eruv Echad L'Kulam, you don't have to tell them. But if it's not Eruv Echad L'Kulam, obviously you have to tell them, and you have to find out to which side they're doing it. That's Shin Tzadik Beis. Shin Tzadik Hey tells you how the action of the Eruv is done. It starts at a mitzvah l'chazer achar shitufei mevoyos k'moi achar Eruv v'chatzeres. The same mitzvah you have to do after Shituf and Mevoyos. You have to make a Shituf Mevoyos, make an Eruv Chatzeres. The same mitzvah applies to Shituf Mevoyos. And Shituf and Eruv Chatzeres, the Alter Rebbe says, this is from the Taz over here in Siman Shin Tzadik Hey, where the Taz here says that the reason for the mitzvah is Kadei Shaloi Yevoyu L'Tilpul Be'isur. You make a bracha on it. The Alter Rebbe says you can make the bracha either when you collect all the flour or when you do the zikui. What is the nusach what is the seder of Eiruvei Chatzeros? That is in the Alter Rebbe's Siddur. If you look, it's in the back of the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. In the new print, you have it in page Tov Kuvav, and the Alter Rebbe begins and says, "Nahagu the minagiz lekabitz kemach mikol bayis ubayis be'erev Pesach." We already know why it's done in Erev Pesach. That we already explained in Siman Shin Samaches. The reason why you do it dafka in Erev Pesach is because if you do it the rest of the year, you didn't keep the matzah from chametz. But if you do it in Erev Pesach, then the matzah you know for sure is kosher Pesach, and then you could use the Erev Chatzeres will serve you also on Pesach. Now the Rebbe continues over here. V'oisin matzah achas shleima. You make one matzah from all the flour that you collected. And with that you make an Eruv for all the Shabbosis of the year. And not only for one Shabbos, even though there was such a thing to do every Shabbos, you do once for the whole year. So you're going to see there is a difference between the two. The minig is, in Shin Samach Vav, the Alter Rebbe writes, the minig was to put the Eruv in the shul. And Siman Shin Pei Zayin, the Alter Rebbe says also that the minig is to hang it up in shul, so that way the kids will see it. Over here in Siddur, the Alter Rebbe does not mention that the minig is to put it in the shul. It's only mashma from afterwards. But if you look in Tfus Rishon of the Siddur, they found it's in Rabbi Levin's Shiurei Halacha L'Maisach Chelik in the beginning. He has over there 2 pages that they found from the Alter Rebbe. From the first print over there, the lashon is V'soilin bebeis hakneses. The Alter Rebbe does add those words. Now let's continue what the Alter Rebbe says in the Seder. After in the Siddur, V'noyagim shashamash noisen hamatzah biyad echad sheyiske b'shvil kol hakol. The shamash who collects everything is the one who puts it in the hands of somebody else, and he's going to be zoicha for the rest of the community. How do you do this zikui? The Alter Rebbe does not tell it to you here, but if you look in Eruv Tavshilin in the Siddur over there, it does say how it's done. It says the lashon Alter Rebbe in Eruv Tavshilin is a misha zoiche noitel beyodoy umagbiyat tefach v'choizer v'noitel miyad hazoiche. And the person who was mezakeh takes it from the hands of the zoiche. Mezakeh mevorech, and the person who's mezakeh goes and says the bracha. Over here in Eiruvei Chatzeres, Alter Rebbe doesn't say it, doesn't have to say it because it's already in Eiruvei Tavshilin, which is more common. Yeah, and over there the person does the bracha. Now, Kashahu mezakeh, Alter Rebbe continues in the Siddur. You have to have in mind all the people that are in the mavoi, in the chatzar, and the mavoi and anybody who's going to join this chatzar or mavoi, doesn't mention a city, throughout in the future, and you have them all in mind. In the Tfus Rishon over there, the Alter Rebbe does say it says, the Lashon seems like, it says, Yikach echad kemach, v'yoymer al misha shochach, v'loy nasan kemach, hashni toisef miyem zeva'elach. Over there it seems like the Alter Rebbe says, after you take the flour and you're mezakeh for all the people who are here, you take more flour for all the people who forgot. Seems like you do a separate one, an additional batch for the people who forgot, or for people who are going to be added into it. The reason for it is because there is a minimum amount that you need from every single person. There is a amount that once you get to the certain amount of you have to add for each person, up until a certain amount. Once you get to a certain amount, you don't need to add anymore. So if you have a small city and you're only mezakeh for a few people, small village, a small chaser, small mavai, then the amount that you use is not going to be enough. If there's going to be another 10 families moving in, when you add up all the flour that you use, it's not enough for them. If you went up to the max, then it's enough. So when it's l'chayla, according to Svara, is when you do this, that's when it's full tradition, you add more for the people that forgot, or for the people who are not part of it, or for the people who will be added into it, you have to add more flour. If you take the max amount to begin with, and you start with that amount, then you don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about it anymore. Now, the Alter Rebbe continues in the Siddur, V'loi yasu erev chatzeros ve'erev Pesach, Elohim ken yesh beis batim bechatzar beis hakneses. Don't do erev chatzeros and Pesach unless you have, and it obviously seems like the Alter Rebbe is talking about that you hang it up in shul. Unless there's two houses in the chatzar of the shul, sheyutro ide erev zeh letaltel l'havya erev zeh lezeh. Do not make it unless, obviously put it in the shul, unless it's going to be at least two houses which will be able to use this Eruv from one to another. But if it says Layasu Eruv Chatzeres, Eruv Chatzeres is the Eruv that you can't put in shul unless it's two houses that can carry from one to another. Eruv Chatzeres has to be put in the Beis Dire. Shetufim Evoyos does not have to be put in the Beis Dire. Shetufim Evoyos you could put Lachatchila in a shul. If you look in the Ktseis HaShulchan and Siman Kuf Hey in Ois Yud Gimel, he brings from the Shari Tshuva that you have to put it in Beis HaKnesses HaGdoilo, HaYoizer Chashuv, Ve'ikar is the main shul in town, Shekol B'nei Ha'ir Shutafim Bo V'Shayachim Lo. You put it in a shul, choose the biggest, nicest, the most, the shul which belongs to the whole city, and it's for obvious reason, everybody is part of it, so they're going to be part of it. And over there in Sifkat Nechafei, he adds, it just goes into the details of it which are connected to the Eruv of a city. He says if the Eruv got ruined before Shabbos, then all the Eruv got ruined means that it got rotten. Doesn't mean that the strings fell. That's a separate thing. The Eruv Nisapesh, the actual matzah went bad. Then all the chatzeres around it all became puzzle, and you're not allowed to carry from the bottom to the chatzer. But if it got ruined on Shabbos, then you are allowed to, because kevon shehutro. However, if you look in Kitzur Shulchan Aruch Siman Tzadik Dalet Sifkat Nechavav, he says, being that we're still chayshish that maybe people are going to carry in the place where the actual Eruv was damaged, because we're talking about if the strings fell or something like that. Therefore, toiv, it's good to fix the Eruv even on Shabbos with a goy, and the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch adds, and you could tell the goy that he should do it only with one knot, not at two knots, one knot with a bow on top of it, not to make a kesher shekayama, etc., if possible. If possible to do it with a goy, if possible to do it in a way that's not a kesher shekayama. Now, if the Eruv broke on a weekday, now that became possible, right? And it was fixed on Shabbos by a goy, it doesn't work. Only the fixing by Shabbos by a guy that we said before only is when it broke on Shabbos. That's kevon shehutro. He still asks the guy to fix it. But if it broke on weekday and therefore there was no Eruv and it now a guy fixes it on Shabbos, it doesn't work. And this is all talking about when they made an Eruv every week by itself, because then the new Eruv has to kick in at least one Shabbos. But if they made an Eruv for the whole year, this is what the Shulchan says, and the first Shabbos it was good, and then came the second week, and on Friday there was a snowstorm and it ripped, and then the guy fixed it on Shabbos, that does work. One second. He still adds over there in the footnote Chavav that it's better that each one should make for himself an Eruv every Shabbos. Why? Because maybe Eruv in his own Chatzar every Shabbos, because maybe the Eruv in Shul got ruined, or maybe the Eruv of the city will get damaged. But do not make a bracha on the Eruv that you do in your own Chatzar, because maybe the Eruv that's hanging in Shul is works. There is a shalah which says that if you have kavanah to dafka not be part of this shtatish Eruv, then you are allowed to make a bracha in your own chatzar when you make your own Eruv. However, even when you do it, you still have to be mezakeh to the whole city. Even when you do it in your own chatzar, you have to say the lashon of mezakeh to the whole city, which you're going to see soon. So that way, because if he only does it for his own chatzar, and he doesn't have the proper separation between him and the rest of the city, he'll make the whole rest, he'll be oiser on the rest of the city. We're going to the shaila of a mother which separated from the rest of them. And
Is his Eruv al Tnai, or?
It's not Eruv al Tnai. I have in mind, I'm not being Mekayim.
Two Eruv, everyone in the city has two Eruv? How does that work?
The way the Shulchan says, each one should make his own thing. Al Tanai, if the one in Shul falls, this one kicks in. That's what you do without a bracha. The Shalom, he brings the Shalom that if you have in mind Mechatchila not to use the Eruv of the city.
So is it also only if the other one breaks?
No, then if the other one breaks, Al Tanai, you're not going to use it, then you can make a bracha. And in Seif Tezvav in the Pnim of the Shulchan, it says if you have a city where, and this is common sense obviously, if you have a city and in the city there's certain areas that you cannot carry from one side to another, it's obvious that you cannot make one global Eruv for the whole city. It doesn't help anything. The same thing, you can't make an Eruv in the Shul that's going to cover both sides. The Eruv in the Shul will only cover all the mevayas that could carry to the Shul without crossing over Rosh Hashanah or anything of the sort. And then, okay, let's go back to the Alter Rebbe in the Siddur. Then there comes the bracha after you do the your mazaket. You say the person, the shamash was mazaket to somebody else. That the zoiche picked it up at tefach, gave it back to him. He takes it and he says the bracha. Sheikh Shem says it's one on mitzvah seiruv. The whole explanation how you can make a bracha on it. And then he continues and he says, Bedain Yehei Shara Lano La'afuki U'La'yuli U'Tiltuli M'Bais L'Bais M'Chatz L'Chatzer M'Bais L'Chatzer M'Chatz L'Bais M'Shus L'Shus. With this, you could take out from a house to a house, from a chatzar to a chatzar, from a chatzar to a house, from a house to a chatzar, whether it's on this Shabbos, whether it's in Shas Shabbos Hashanah. Lanu U'Lechol Hadorim B'Shchuna Hazois, B'Shchuna, all people living in this neighborhood. In parentheses, as Nusach Acher Be'ir Hazois, in this city. If you look in the Tfus Rishon, it says, doesn't even mention B'Shchuna Hazois, it says, V'Lechol Yisrael Hadorim Be'ir Hazois, just Be'ir Hazois. And this is back to what the Shulchan says, even if you make your own Eruv, you should always have in mind to do it for everybody else. And with this, we concluded Hilchos Eiruvei Chatzeres, Hadran Alach, and Chazara starts tomorrow.